Welcome to the universe in a seashell, the podcast dedicated to science, life, and girl power. I'm Kara Bartek and I'm your host. I'm a PhD, an author, and I want to make this world a more equal and opportune place, one girl at a time. Hey guys, and welcome to the universe in a seashell. Today we're going to be talking about what dinosaurs may have actually looked like. We definitely have the fossils, which is the bones of the dinosaurs, but we don't have any evidence of what they may have really looked like. So we're going to go into some predominant theories in this, in particular feathers. What do you think about a feathered dinosaur?
I can see a feathered dinosaur.
That's my co-host Cece, and I'm going to talk a little bit more to her, but first I want to cover some basics about the show. Remember, you can find us on Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review because your opinion matters. Not only is that great feedback for the podcast itself, but it helps raise our visibility level. Because remember, this podcast is all about making this world a more equal and opportune place, one girl at a time. And I can't do that alone. You can also find me on Facebook at Kara Bartek Author, or you can go to the Universe in a Seashell's own Facebook page. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, which again, my Twitter game, it really stinks. Somebody needs to help me learn how to Twitter. And also Snapchatting. Okay, so I'm still struggling with Snapchat, aren't I, Cece?
Kind of. The only thing you're good at is finding the face thing.
Finding the filters? Okay, so what's your favorite filter so far?
What's yours?
I like the filters that make me look like I'm wearing makeup. Because I don't wear makeup all that often, but it gives me a lot of inspiration to try to apply makeup in a way that makes it look like I've slept recently.
I'm still gonna look for more filters.
What about that filter that puts a beard on your face? Do you like that one?
No.
You don't like that one? It's kind of scary. There's also the one that puts the like, it makes your face look really small but your eyes really big. That one's kind of weird and freaky. Oh, and then there's the one that makes you into a hot dog. I do like that one, but it kind of makes me hungry.
And that main one makes your cheeks bulge out.
It does.
It's weird.
It totally does. So if you have any suggestions for the show, maybe there's a topic you'd like to cover, maybe you know something about the topic, there might be a guest that you want to hear from, or you just have something that you want to say, please drop me a line at universeinaseashell@gmail.com. Again, that's universeinaseashell@gmail.com. There's no the in there, which that could be a little bit confusing. But I thought that would be too much typing to add the at the beginning to the email address. So I tried to shorten it up.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to just talk about before we get into these feathered dinosaurs. So Cece's been really busy this summer with dance camp. And there was something that I discovered about her and her friends at dance camp. Okay, what's up with you guys being obsessed with mac and cheese?
We just like cheese and mac and cheese.
Okay, but that boxed mac and cheese is super gross. And you still eat it.
Gross.
Well, it kind of tastes like soap sometimes.
So No.
It's not real cheese, it's just powder.
Are you out of your mind?
Apparently. But okay, so she has friends that are so obsessed with mac and cheese, they want to put, and they have eaten it this way, mac and cheese on pizza, mac and cheese on hamburgers. There was even discussion of a mac and cheese taco.
I love mac and cheese.
What?
I love mac and cheese tacos.
Okay, that's just, it's really out there. That's way out there. So, who else out there loves mac and cheese? You gotta let me know. If you're as obsessed with mac and cheese as Cece and her friends, drop us a line and tell us all about it. Because I think it's crazy to have a mac and cheese taco. I can see mac and cheese pizza. I can see mac and cheese on a hamburger. Because, you know, there's cheese on hamburgers, right? So that kind of makes sense. But a mac and cheese taco, I think it totally crosses the line. Because what do you do? So do you fill it with the taco toppings, or is it just mac and cheese put into a tortilla?
Mac and cheese put into a taco shell.
So do you put the sour cream, guacamole?
No, only mac and cheese.
Okay. What's up with that? What's up with that? Also, now the last time that we talked, we were trying to figure out if T-Rexes actually laid eggs. So I looked into this. Okay, so here's the common prevailing scientific theory on if T-Rexes laid eggs. Now, in science, you have to make a statement that is true, you generally have to have what's called direct evidence. So that means you have to have found something. So basically, nobody has ever found a T-Rex egg. So we don't know if they actually lay eggs. We don't have the direct evidence. However, scientists do believe that the female T-Rexes had a pelvis structure that was large enough to allow an egg to pass through. So they think that's pretty good evidence that T-Rexes lay eggs. But here's the deal. If they did lay eggs, their eggs would be as large as a French loaf of bread. Yeah, that's huge. Okay. And their nests would be 9 foot in diameter.
That's big.
Totally, but it's a really big dinosaur. Do you remember Dad and I were at that conference in Chicago and we went to the Field Museum and we actually saw...
Sue.
Yes. And she was all put together. She was a huge T-Rex. It's hard to imagine how large dinosaurs are until you see their entire skeleton put together and on display.
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you know how many eggs they laid each spring?
Who, the T-Rex is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, see, I think that's the thing. Scientists don't really know. So basically, at this point, all they can do is speculate.
Yeah, because they don't really have evidence that they really did lay eggs.
Exactly. So at this point, it's all theory. And that's the good thing about scientists, is scientists can put together all of the available evidence and make really good guesses. And that's called a hypothesis, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's what they do. They make hypotheses. So I didn't find anything out there on how many eggs they believe that the T-Rex would have laid, just that they probably did lay eggs. So anyway, I also have a science joke for you, Cece. And I know how much you love those, right?
Yes, but the last one that you told me was obvious.
Okay, so let's see this one. Okay. What does a subatomic duck say?
What?
Quark. I know, it's lame. It's very lame. But that's science jokes. They're I think it's funny. Don't you get it? A quark, a subatomic duck, just like a subatomic particle. Okay, anyway. That deserves the wah, wah, wah. Okay. So let's get back to the topic at hand, which is what dinosaurs actually looked like. So let's back up a little bit and let's give a brief overview on dinosaurs. So dinosaurs refer to a very specific type of reptile that lived, a very long time ago. we're not talking about any other animal that lived during that time period except for these very, very large reptiles. So according to our written history, the first fossil that was ever recovered was that of a megalosaurus in 1819 by an Englishman named William Buckland. And the name dinosaur actually came from the Greek root, or the Greek word dinosauria, which means terrible lizard. Now, this was coined by Sir Richard Owen, who was an acclaimed anatomist in 1842. So we've got the first discovery happening in 1819, and they didn't really talk about what these creatures were until 1842. Now, when I was in school, that's exactly what we were told dinosaur meant. Terrible lizard, kind of referring to how ferocious and carnivorous and, just terrible in general.
Because they ate like their own kind and stuff. It was weird.
Yeah, so they did. So they were these amazing predators. But actually, I looked into this, and the original paper that he wrote where he talked about this word dinosauria, he actually meant that the dinosaurs were fearfully great. So that meant they were these amazing, awesome creatures. So it kind of was more on the positive side, not necessarily meaning that they were these terrible, savage, horrible things, which I'm sure they could have been. But what he was in awe of is how large and how efficient they were in terms of being a predator, surviving, doing all of the things that were necessary to really be the top creature at that period of time. Okay, so they appeared about 240 million years ago during the Triassic period. Now, here, let me give you the very quick overview of these periods. So between 250 and 200 million years ago, that's considered the Triassic period. Now, the Jurassic period began between 200 million and 145 million years ago. And then we have this third period of time. And again, this all refers to the periods when the dinosaurs lived. It was called the Cretaceous, and that was between 145 million years ago and 65 million years ago. So they appeared during the Triassic about 240 million years ago, and they actually disappeared about 65 million years ago during the Cretaceous. Now, the reason that they disappeared is there was a very large extinction event. Now, the only direct evidence that we have that this extinction event occurred, number one, there's no dinosaurs around, right? So we know that for whatever reason, they went away. And what we have found in the geologic record, because, again, this is where paleontologists come into play. They dig down deep into our earth and into our soils, and they discover these fossils that are out there. Well, during their digging, they found a thin layer of sediment that's called the KPG boundary, which is found all throughout the world, not only on land, but also in our oceans. And it's a boundary of clay that shows very high levels of the metal iridium. Okay, and iridium occurs naturally in the Earth's crust, but it's very rare. So it wouldn't be common to find a big layer of it. It's where it's most abundant is in comets and asteroids. So this is what scientists hypothesized. Since they found this layer of iridium, they believed that there was an asteroid or a comet strike that occurred. Okay, now when this big, huge, heavenly body struck the Earth, they believe it set off a chain reaction of a lot of volcanic activity. It also kicked up a ton of dust, sediment, and junk into the air. And that set off something that's called the impact winter. And the impact winter basically is when the skies darken, when they fill up with volcanic ash, dust, all of those things, it begins to block out the sun. And what happens when the sun gets blocked out?
There's no
Yeah, and plants need light, animals need light, and what ends up happening is it sets off a chain reaction of death and destruction. So if we have dinosaurs that are herbivores, right, that they're eating the plants, and the plants begin to die, what happens to those guys?
They die.
They die. Now, let's say that those herbivores are food for a larger dinosaur that is a carnivore, right? What happens to the carnivores?
They die.
Right. So, it's this big, again, chain reaction of death and destruction that happens. So we've got animals starving, we've got disease setting in, and that's how the extinction occurs. I've seen a lot of evidence that the strike probably happened off of the coast of South America, but nobody really knows. It's again all speculation. There's not a lot of direct evidence of where this strike occurred. But for the most part, scientists agree that extinction happened because of an impact on Earth. So, currently, we do have about 700 types of dinosaurs that have been identified by scientists. And again, they were carnivorous, herbivorous, and they also ate both. And eating both is being an omnivore. Now, what we have are fossils. And fossils are basically bones, right? And it's really difficult to understand a lot about an animal that lived so long ago because we don't have any photographic evidence, we don't have any written evidence. There weren't people living back then that could tell us about what happened. All we have are these bones, which the bones is just one tiny piece of these creatures. And the bones definitely don't tell us what these animals look like. Now, since common belief was that they are reptiles, scientists kind of thought that that's what they acted like, was a reptile, that they were cold-blooded. And what are cold-blooded animals like?
They stay in the heat a lot.
Yeah, they're kind of slow-moving. Their metabolism depends a lot on the sun. They don't get out too much. Turtles, they don't run really fast, right? They're kind of slow moving. So, but what we discovered is that's kind of the old way of thinking that dinosaurs were cold-blooded. And also, warm-blooded and cold-blooded is not something that scientists really think of anymore. In the late because when I was in school, warm-blooded and cold-blooded were a way to classify animals, okay? I can't believe this, but that is an old way of thinking, okay? Right now, scientists have a much more complex view of how animals are being classified, and warm-blooded and cold-blooded seems to be on the out in terms of classification. And it also applies to the dinosaurs, because here's what happened. In the late 1960s, the view of dinosaurs really began to change, but even as far back as 1859, there were certain people who believed that dinosaurs may have been related to birds. Okay, so Charles Darwin published a very important book about evolution and natural selection. It was called On the Origin of Species. And about that time, there was a biologist named Thomas Henry Huxley, and he actually said that birds were descendants of dinosaurs. And what do you think people thought? What do you think they thought? No, that he was maybe kind of crazy. Well, what he did is he compared the skeletal structure of Compsognath. Now, these dinosaur names, they're kind of hard, so bear with me on this. Compsognath, Compsognathus. Here, Cece, can you pronounce this one?
Compsognathus.
I think that's pretty close. Now, and this was a small theropod. And now the theropods are the two-legged dinosaurs, right? Like the raptors, the T-Rexes. And he was comparing that to the very first bird, which is Archaeopteryx. Now, you and I have read about Archaeopteryx, right, in our dinosaur books?
And it's feathered, so.
Right. Now, both of these dinosaurs were found together in an Upper Jurassic Bavarian limestone, which is Sonophen. And again, I'm sure I'm butchering that one because that sounds very German. I'm doing my best here. And he showed that apart from its hands and feathers, Archaeopteryx was very similar to Compsognathus. Is that close? Compsognathus?
Let me see.
Okay, you try it.
It's close.
It is close. Okay. So this was really important because they believe that Archaeopteryx is truly a transitional fossil. Okay, and this is important. So let's talk about what a transitional fossil means. That means that this particular species shows direct evidence of where dinosaurs began to transition into birds. Okay? Very important. So in 1969, John Ostrom described, here's another one. Now Cece and I looked this one up online and we actually listened to it. Dinoconus? Folks, these dinosaur words are on a whole new level. We need to talk to the paleontologist about maybe calling them something a little more simple that can be pronounced across multiple languages.
Dinosaurs.
Okay.
That's the closest that I could.
Okay, now so Dinosaurs. Now we could make this much more simpler. We could just call him Don.
Or we could call him that. They called him a nickname.
He was the clawed. He was the clawed lizard, right? He was the clawed because he's kind of a raptor.
For now, guys, we're just gonna call him the clawed lizard.
I think we should call him Don. That's so much easier to pronounce.
The clawed lizard is really easy too.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, so he's a theropod, and again, a theropod is the two-legged dinosaur. And when we looked at him, he looked just like a raptor, like a velociraptor. Like he had that same stance. And in a velociraptor, they are the smaller. They kind of look like a smaller T-Rex. Anyway, so he was discovered in Montana in 1964, and his skeletal resemblance to birds was unmistakable. Okay, and last podcast. Remember I said something about T-Rex looking like a giant chicken? So it's true. So if you look at, because you and I were watching a documentary on dinosaurs not that long, well, no, maybe it's been a few years now, but a scientist went out to an ostrich farm and looked at the ostrich from behind. So the wings of the ostrich, if you can imagine this, the wings of the ostrich were out, and she was showing us what the skeletal structure of that ostrich wing looked like underneath. And let me tell you, it looked like a T-Rex arm, because that's the deal with T-Rexes, right? Their arms are so tiny. It's the same way Penny, right, when Penny tries to hand me stuff from the back seat and she gets those T-Rex arms. Penny really has long arms, but when I'm trying to get something from the back seat when I'm driving, she gets these T-Rex arms, right?
And I have to go, Penny, hand it to me.
Exactly. So anyway, so this ostrich, and I'm going to have to look up the name of that documentary because it was really good. And it was this lady paleontologist who, it was all about her proposing these really out there ideas, in particular, the fact that dinosaurs are very closely related to birds. So anyway, the ostrich looked a lot like a T-Rex. Okay, now, so here we go. And again, remember what we said in science. Scientists need direct evidence. So they've got all of this speculation. They've got all these hypotheses that they're related. But what they haven't found yet is the feather. But wait a second. So one of the earliest discoveries of possible feather impressions, this is not actually the feathers themselves, was on an ichneofossil so this would have been 195 to 199 million years old formation, 195 to 199 million years ago, because this was in a Portland formation in the northeastern United States. Scientists interpreted traces of two footprints in this fossil formation as feather impressions, okay? So what the fossil actually looked like was two dinosaurs kind of sat down in the mud. They had their bellies laying down in the mud. They got up, they did whatever. They went down to the movies, whatever dinosaurs did, okay? I don't even know what dinosaurs did. But anyway, they were definitely laying in this mud, and the mud fossilized, okay? And so what the scientists saw was it looked like there was a belly, that the belly of a feathered dinosaur had been there, okay? So this is the very first time that they're saying, okay, now we didn't find a feather, but we found something that looked like a feather. Now, and of course, this raised a lot of questions in the scientific community, because here's one thing about scientists. Scientists don't want to be told that they're wrong. And they, a lot of times, don't want to change their mind after they've put in a ton of hard work into a particular theory. And that is very, very true for paleontologists, because they've developed over, almost 100 years at this point of work and evidence. All of a sudden they're going to have to really radically shift their mentality, and that was tough for them, okay? Now, there was about 100 years that passed. They did find this one particular impression of this dinosaur who was laying down in the mud, but again, they didn't have any direct evidence. However, there were some well-preserved fossils of feathered dinosaurs that were discovered during the 1990s. And a ton more are being found. Now, let me talk about this one. These particular fossils were preserved in Lagerstadt, a sedimentary deposit exhibiting remarkable richness and completeness in its fossils in China. Okay? Now, on that same documentary, do you remember that all of these fossils were coming out of China? And I think the reason that the feathers had been preserved very well was just the type of geology that they were preserved in, because they were in more volcanic ash, not necessarily the mud. So a lot of these things, they didn't break down over time.
Because I had a question, like, did they find feathers around it to prove that it was a feathered bird? And you answered my question.
Yes, absolutely. They found it. So the area in here is just a little bit more about why these feathers were actually preserved. The area had repeatedly been smothered in volcanic ash. That were these eruptions in Inner Mongolia about 124 million years ago during the early Cretaceous, okay? And this fine-grained ash preserved that tissue and that detail of the feathers much better than just regular old mud or tar pits or something. Because, like I said, the bones are that's the most tough part of an animal, of a dinosaur. Right, so bones are easier to preserve than a feather. Think about how delicate a feather is versus a bone.
You can easily tear off pieces off of it, so you have to be very careful.
Totally. Okay. Now, there's also a different type of evidence that exists. Okay, so they're starting to find all these fossils in China, but there's also this bigger piece of what's called behavioral evidence that we should have seen all along. So we talked about it. Birds lay eggs, right? Mm-hmm. Now, who else was laying eggs? What are we talking about? Who's laying eggs?
Feathered bird?
Of course, birds, but dinosaurs. Dinosaurs lay eggs, right? So that's what we're talking about. These dinosaurs have been laying eggs. So we've got behavioral evidence, direct behavioral evidence that birds and dinosaurs are sharing this characteristic, which is this egg laying, okay? Now, In 2011, there were samples of amber. Okay, now amber, that's that pretty yellow rock, right, that a lot of very, very, very old fossils have been preserved in, because basically it's sap from trees, okay? Have you seen that on Jurassic Park? That's kind of how they get the DNA for Jurassic Park, is out of these samples of amber. And so these samples actually contained real feathers. Okay, here we go. This is the direct evidence. These feathers were about 75 to 80 million years ago during the Cretaceous. There's very strong evidence that these feathers were both from dinosaurs and from birds. Initial analysis suggests that some of the feathers were used for insulation and not flight. Okay, so this is when we're talking about the transition. Okay, there were definitely flying dinosaurs. Like, who's your favorite flying dinosaur? Well, that's actually a bird. That's considered a bird. What about pterodactyls? Okay, so it's very early in the morning. Cece still needs her coffee, right? She's not a lively co-host today. She's just blinking at me at this point. You've had too much mac and cheese and too much fun at dance camp. But anyway, okay. So those are called protofeathers. So the feathers, and this is how evolution works. So the feathers were starting to come up on these dinosaurs. They showed them, but they were not being used for flight, just like we see today. Because now when we see feathers on a bird, we're saying, okay, this guy flies. That's why he has the feather, to get up in the air, to be able to navigate through the air, to be able to get from place to place.
But there's one bird that doesn't use feathers.
What's that?
Penguin.
True.
He doesn't fly.
True.
He waddles.
True. That should be another episode. Birds that don't use feathers. Why don't they use their feathers to fly? That would be, anyway.
I have no idea why.
Okay, we're totally getting off topic. Come back to the dinosaurs and the feathers. Here we are. Okay. Now, so like I said, these samples that were found in this amber that was about 80 million years old showed that, again, this was used for insulation and not necessarily flight. These are, and this is what we talk about, proto-feathers, okay? So, which I kind of think is a cool word, proto-feathers. Just like a prototype, proto-feathers.
So what does proto-flight mean?
Proto-flight?
Whatever you're talking about.
Proto-feathers, that means they are a type of transitional feather. So they weren't necessarily being used for flight in the way that we think of it. They had different purposes. And what scientists were speculating for these samples is that they were being used for insulation, that they were kind of getting ready to fly.
That I was saying proto-flight.
Again, look at you. I think you've got some mac and cheese clogging up your brain. That's what I think. I think if we were to take an x-ray, that's all Cece ate last night, was a big bowl of mac and cheese. I asked her.
No, I'm tired.
Oh my gosh, did you really have to scream into the microphone? Now everybody's ear is going to be blown out. Okay. So, now, more complex feathers were revealed to have variations in coloration similar to modern birds, while simpler proto-feathers were predominantly dark. Only 11 of these specimens are currently known, and the specimens are way, way, way too rare for scientists to actually drill down into the amber and take a tissue sample. But there are plans for what's called non-destructive high-resolution X-ray imaging, okay? So that means they will be able to image the feathers much, much better, but without having to break through that amber, because they are so rare. Now, here's another cool one. In 2016, there was a discovery of a feathered dinosaur tail. Okay, we're not talking about an Archaeopteryx or anything. We're talking about an actual dinosaur tail that was preserved in amber that is estimated to be 99 million years old. Okay, And they found the specimen at an amber market in Myanmar. Now, so basically, somebody was just selling this amber at a store, and they actually found it. So this is the first definitive discovery of dinosaur material in amber. Now, in March 2018, scientists reported that Archaeopteryx was likely capable of flight, but in a manner that was substantially different from that of modern birds. So that's kind of where we're at on dinosaurs having feathers being related to birds.
I have a question.
What?
Was it a small tail or a big tail?
You know, I didn't look at that. My guess is it's got to be relatively big, right? I think that's something that we need to look into.
Because if it belongs to a dinosaur like Archaeopteryx or whatever.
See, that's a tongue twister. We could have, instead of Archaeopteryx, we could just call him Art. Or Aaron. Another A word. That's really hard. These are tongue twisters.
I know.
We should have an episode where we just pronounce dinosaur names. What do you think? Or we could come up with names for them ourselves, just like that. Dawn, Art, Petunia, Begonia.
Can we get back to the topic at hand?
Well, that's all I've got. That's all I've got on feathered dinosaurs. So basically, here we are. And we believe that dinosaurs were probably covered in feathers. So I always imagine them being covered in scales and basically looking like a giant lizard. When in reality, they probably look like giant chickens. Okay. Well, you can't see that because this is an audio recording, but Cece just did a wild chicken dance. So anyway, now I want to put something out there for you guys. Now, next week, I'm going to be finishing up the final field notes for Dad and Mai's research. So I'm not going to have an in-depth episode, although we're going to have something cool. Don't worry, I've got something really cool coming out. But I was thinking about after we finish up our research for this season that I was going to do a special episode on summer science with some downloadable plans. So something that you could take and you could actually do. But I need feedback from you guys. So please shoot me an email. Let me know what some of your favorite science projects are, some of the things that you want to learn. Because I'd like to create something that we could be doing at home. What do you think, Cece?
That's pretty cool because sometimes people don't have stuff and they're like, I'm bored.
Yeah, summer can be a boring time. Summer can definitely be a boring time. So anyway, shoot me an email at universeinaseashell@gmail.com. Again, that's universeinaseashell@gmail.com. Thank you guys for listening. Cece, you got anything to say, or do you want to balk into the microphone again? You want to balk into the microphone again?
Bye!
Oh my goodness. All right, have a great day. Thanks for listening.